for this webinar. This is an important topic, and it is, I know, Dr. Hudnall's life work. We're so happy to have you with us, Dr. Hudnall. We'll hear a little bit more about him as our presenter in a few minutes. I want to introduce myself. I am Jeremy Glauser, the CEO and founder of eLuma, and Paula Morrison, who is also on our team here at eLuma and is a mental health expert and a school psychologist by background and training. Today, the webinar is about Suicide 101, what we know about youth suicide and what we don't know. Today, what you can expect is a quick introduction, a very good presentation from Dr. Hudnall, and a follow-on Q&A. So if you do have questions, make sure you put them into the chat. At the bottom of the Zoom window, if you move your mouse, you should see an icon that looks like a chat bubble. Open that up and you can type your questions in there. Paula and I will keep track of those and make sure that we discuss those at the end. We also want you to be aware that there is a closed captioning option. At the bottom of the Zoom screen, again, if you move your mouse, there is an icon for closed captioning. Please feel free to turn that on so that you can see and hear. Who is eLuma? Today we're sponsoring this webinar because it's very important to us. We are focused on helping students achieve their potential, and we offer systemic solutions to schools in the area of mental health and special education. So building community, providing content is one of our objectives. So we hope that today you are able to learn and garner some good tools that will help you educate students and provide supports to them. We are in 36 states, serve over 33,000 students, and we invite you to follow us on Twitter or Facebook and join the conversation. Please join this conversation because it is truly going to take all of us to come together and figure out how to move forward and address mental health, address the needs of our amazing students. So today, we also want to invite you on a special offer. Schedule a consultation with our team, and then we'll donate $50 to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is NAMI. Again, $50 will be donated. We'd love you to come and join. So there's a link. Go to eluma.com/mental-health-consultation. There's also a QR code if you want to use your camera, pull out your camera, and then tap the link that appears when you scan that QR code. We really do want to connect, learn together, and of course, there's a good outcome with that $50 donation. Before I hand it over to Paula, I do want to explain this webinar, a webinar series that it contains a lot of great information. Dr. Hudnall is a special guest in this webinar series, and we're so grateful to have him in September, which is Suicide Awareness Month. And there are many other great webinars that you can go back and watch from Dr. Samet or Phyllis Wolfram that we've had previously. We also invite you to join us for a webinar tomorrow with Jenny Millward and Steve Ireland. That's going to be about Medicaid and what's changing, what we're seeing, and there's going to be a lot of great information shared. There's also a webinar track for mental health. Go to eluma.com/webinars and you can find resources. You can watch past webinars, download resources, and register for future webinars. Come join the conversation. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Paula to introduce our guest, Dr. Hudnall.
Thank you, Jeremy. Welcome, everyone. And I'm so pleased to introduce Dr. Greg Hudnall, who has over 30 years of experience and is considered one of the leading experts in the community and school-based suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. As a former high school principal and associate superintendent with Provo City School District, he's the founder of Hope for Utah, which is a nonprofit community-based organization dedicated to suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. Hope Squad has been responsible for over 5,000 students referred for help and over 1,000 hospitalized. The Hope Squad program is now in over 950 schools around the world. He has led statewide volunteer suicide crisis teams that have responded to over 50 youth suicides and has trained over 75,000 educators, therapists, parents, and others in suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. So I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Greg Hudnall. It's all yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that introduction. And Jeremy, thank you for everything.
And I'll stop sharing here so that you can get your screen sharing, Dr. Hudnall. And I just want to pile on with that because I live here in Utah and I've seen the good work that Dr. Hudnall has done with the Hope Squad, and very excited to hear what you have to share today. Thank you, Dr. Hudnall.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to walk through some slides of what we know and what we do not know about youth suicide. As mentioned, I oversee a crisis team for the state of Utah and have been involved with law enforcement, many times first responders, to some very difficult situations. So a lot of this is what we know from the latest research and then also from experiences. I'm going to start just quickly sharing the Hope Squad story because I think it really helps people understand the concept of the program. Hope Squad is a school-based program. As a high school principal in Provo, Utah, I lost 5 kids to suicide, spoke at a couple of their funerals, and then I was contacted by the Provo police to come down and identify the body of a 14-year-old who had taken his life. Very, very difficult. Here's a short introduction, and it really shows the value of peer-to-peer, especially you therapists that work with young people in crisis. One of the things I train counselors and therapists and psychologists is to always start out by asking, the young person about their friends and how well connected they are.
In high schools across the country, a crisis. Who here knows somebody personally who's contemplated suicide? Wow. Every single one of you. Suicide now the second leading cause of death between the ages of 10 and 18. For Utah Principal Dr. Greg Hudnall, it's more than statistics after he was called to identify the body of one of his 14-year-old students.
I literally threw up and sobbed. I made a vow that I would do everything that I could to help prevent suicide.
He founded Hope Squad, a way to help kids change how they talk about mental illness.
Those young people feel like they're the only one, that they're embarrassed, they're struggling.
The program gives students the tools to recognize those in need and get them help.
I don't think that most people understand that people do say that they're going to commit suicide most of the time before they do.
There are now more than 500 squads across 18 states and Canada. Another 100 will begin next year.
We're having this connection now, we're having this relationship now, and I care about you.
Students are chosen by their peers and specially trained, meeting regularly. This is Hope Squad's first year in Mason, Ohio, and the first year without a suicide since Abby Gadio started at the school 4 years ago.
Do you think Hope Squad has saved lives this year? For sure. I think that because of Hope Squad, we get to those students early enough.
That stigma is breaking down. Students are willing to accept help.
5th grader Valerie Golvar recently spoke up when she saw a friend was cutting herself.
She told me about it and said, "Don't tell anyone." And my immediate reaction was to go straight to a Hope Squad advisor or an adult.
A move that may have made all the difference for that student and her peers.
The best part about Hope Squad is just knowing that you're able to help
And hope at a time they need it most. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News, Mason, Ohio.
So one of the things working with youth, the CDC did a research project in 2019, and this is pre-COVID. 9th through 12th graders, 19% of them seriously considered attempting suicide. And then you can see 16% actually made some form of plan. 9% actually attempted, and then 3% made a suicide attempt that had to be treated by a doctor. One of the things that we learned is we pulled our team together in Provo. Provo City School District was averaging 1 to 2 suicides a year. We're the 9th largest in the state of Utah with about 16,000 kids. And unfortunately, here we are in Provo and everybody thinking everything is perfect. But the reality is, there are a lot of challenges out there, as you know, as professionals. But research shows that half of all lifetime of cases of mental illness begin by age 14. So they've done thousands of interviews with individuals that have attempted, and what they found is between the ages of 10 to 14 is when individuals started to recognize that they were struggling. So one of the things we learned, we put together a task force. I was promoted to the district office, and we really focused on parents because we saw parents as the gatekeepers to young people. And we figured if we were going to prevent suicide, we needed to focus on the family and the homes. And so we trained about 5,000 people in our community, but we were still losing kids every year. We had 1 or 2 good years. And then we had a young man walk into Provo High School, take his watch off, give it to his best friend, said, "I'm not going to need this after tomorrow." Went on to tell 5 other friends he was going to take his life, and not one of those friends told an adult. So we knew we needed to change our focus from focusing on the adults to focusing on kids, because kids talk to kids. We put a model together, looked at all the programs around the world. We were very eclectic. What we felt as educators, we really wanted a program that was designed by educators in partnership with mental health. So we had Intermountain Healthcare, we had Wasatch Mental Health, Brigham Young University, and some amazing school counselors, psychologists, and social workers work on developing this model. We went up to Timpview High School, which is right next to Brigham Young University. At the time, it was our ground zero. It was the school that had more threats, more attempts, more suicides than any other school. The previous 3 years, they had 4 suicides. And we figured if we were really going to start a program, we wanted to see how well it would work within a system that had struggling. And here's the model that we created, the Hope Squad.
Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among youth between ages 10 to 19 years old. 4,600 youth are lost to suicide each year. However, most suicides are preventable. Youth who are contemplating suicide frequently give warning signs of their distress. 7 out of 10 will tell a friend or give a warning sign that they are struggling, but many of their friends do not tell an adult. A Hope Squad is a group of students nominated by their peers as good listeners and caring fellow students. They work closely with the local mental health agency. Hope Squad students are taught by the school counselor and advisors on how to recognize suicide warning signs in their peers and provide support. Hope Squad members are trained on how to talk to a fellow struggling student. If the peer needs help, they listen and then try to convince them to go see an adult in the school. If that does not work, they inform a school counselor about their concerns about their peers, so the advisors can contact the student and the parents for additional help and support. Hope Squad members also bring suicide prevention awareness to the entire school by holding an annual Hope Week, where fellow peers are given information about suicide prevention. For more information, please visit www.hopesquad.com.
So here's from 1999, 2004, we were averaging 1 to 2 suicides a year. If you were to go the previous 10 years, you'd see 1 to 2 suicides every year. So this is when we did our training with our adults. But look what happened when we added the Hope Squad, the peer-to-peer. 9 years without a suicide. And that really is the strength of empowering young people to understand the warning signs, the risk factors, how to talk to a peer, but most important, when to go to an adult. So moving on of what we do know, what do we know from the pandemic? Because I think our lives, at least for the next little while, will be focused on pre-COVID and then post-COVID. And so what do we know from the pandemic? So I'd like to ask in the chat, how many of you think suicides went up or went down during the pandemic? What do you think? I'd like to see you just respond in the chat, whether they went up or down. So you can just do one or the other, up or down. What do you think? And being a professional teacher, I'll wait until I get some answers. Okay, yeah, up. Up. Up, okay. Okay, thank you, Sarah. So interesting enough, suicides actually went down the first year. Now they did go up the second year, and we're seeing the responses from that, but suicides actually decreased the first year of the pandemic by 3% overall, with significant among females, almost 8%, and males 2%. So people always ask, why did suicides decrease? Here's what we know. Kids were not being bullied in school. Parents were spending more time reconnecting as a family, eating meals, playing games, and watching movies. And then families had time to notice children struggling and were able to reach out for help. I think the most powerful thing that rises to the top is that families were reconnecting, just like we were talking about. They were spending time together instead of always, jumping in the car, running from one event to the next event, whether it was work, whether it was school activities, whether it was church activities. We tend to be constantly on the run. And so it really took a break from that. But the challenge is, and this is one of the things that I talk a lot about, is not always fun and happiness during the pandemic. According to the CDC, there was a 22.3% spike in the emergency room for potential suicides for young people ages 12 to 17. We saw that trend continue to rise during that time. And the data was really alarming among young girls ages 12 to 17. And we even saw it drop down to elementary age. You look at that bottom sentence, emergency room department visits, attempts were up 50% compared to 2020 when we went through the first part of the pandemic. And I think this is the one that scares me the most. In my state of Utah, we've actually seen some huge successes in working with young people ages 10 to 17. We've seen suicides go down. But when you jump into that ages 18 to 24, 1 in 4 people aged 18 to 24 seriously contemplated taking their lives by suicide. Think about that. 1 in 4. Suicide rates remain high in our nation despite 2 consecutive years of decline. And now we're seeing the fallout from that. We're seeing the fallout from that time when people really struggling, because it's important for us to be connected. And it's also important to be able to get help when we know a friend is struggling. So what do we not know about youth suicides? And I think this is the question I get asked a lot. What do we not know? Teen suicide has been on the rise across the world, not just in the United States. And we really don't know why. We have a lot of different perceptions. CDC report pre-COVID, that was the one that was 2019 that talked about the young people, revealed that teenage suicide rates have increased exponentially in the past decade. So we're looking at that window of all of those years that we've been able to collect data. According to the report, teenage suicide rates have increased nearly 56%. And when you look at the CDC, they're always 2 years behind. And part of this is a longitudinal study. The rates of 6.8 deaths per 100,000 jumped to about 10.8. Rise in teenage suicide specifically has outpaced the increase in suicides overall. And I think that's the thing that scares us the most. I love this comment by a researcher. She says, the truth is anyone who says they definitely know what the cause is doesn't know what they're talking about. And I think what she really condenses it, and it's one of the things that I reference all the time, that suicide is a very complex problem with no easy answers or easy solutions. And it's very individualized. What's an irksome for one person is enough to push someone else over the edge. So what are the explanations for the increase? You hear a lot of different ideas and different concepts out there. Rise of social media always rises to the top. More demanding academic schedules in school. And then shows like Netflix 13 Reasons Why, contributing to the glamorization and the romanticizing of suicide. So what makes this particular issue difficult to study by the researchers is that there's a grain of truth to these explanations. Heavy social media use has been linked to higher rates of depression and lower self-esteem. However, it's unknown whether social media use has any correlation with higher rates of self-harm or suicide specifically. And that's been the challenge for this study. Another study found that teenage suicide rates rose slightly following the release of 13 Reasons Why. And you can see that study from the CDC. We do know that it did increase, but it wasn't this huge increase just following. But correlation does not equal causation, and most mental health experts throw caution against isolating one cause or factor when discussing suicide. I hear that a lot from parents. Oh, it was the medicine, or it was their girlfriend broke up with them, or it was their grades. You know, there are a lot of variables that play into it, and that's the difficult part. But we do know that there are certain factors, such as a history of mental illness, especially if it runs in their family, that they're struggling with it, substance use, that put teenagers at increased risk for taking their own lives. The reality is the mental health establishment simply doesn't have enough research to draw firm scientific conclusions about what causes certain spikes in suicide. Dr. April Foreman, a psychologist and a board member at the AAAS, regardless of what external factors may or may not be contributing, it is much more likely there are complex things going on in society. We just don't understand suicide well enough. You look at when Robin Williams took his life, suicides went up around the world, not just in the United States. So there was a little bubble, an uptick from that. And that was the way it was portrayed on social media. So what do we know about youth suicides? What we do know is that the majority of people who have lots of bad things happen or have lots of stress in their lives don't take their lives. So we know something else is happening in the brain of someone who kills themselves. My wife is a therapist with the VA, and she's taught me a great concept. For every adult that dies by suicide, there are 25 other adults that attempt. So it's a 1 to 25 ratio. For every young person, ages 26 and below, that dies by suicide, there's upwards of 150 to 200 others that attempt. Think about that, 1 to 200. But there's no single cause for suicide. What we do know is suicide most often occurs when stressors exceed the current coping abilities of someone suffering from a mental health condition. Age 10 is the new age 16. Think about it. Age 10, you're talking 5th grade. We're not imagining a child that is getting shorter. Experts say typical teen behaviors are becoming common among kids ages 8 to 12. And we're seeing that with anxiety, cutting, and depression in the elementary schools. Girls wear makeup, listen to hip hop, chat on Facebook. Boys drop toys for iPods, get highlights in their hair, and think parents are annoying, right? And think about what Maslow says. Maslow says families provide food, clothing, shelter, and safety, and society provides everything else. And by the time you're in middle school, it's more important to have a friend than it is to have a family. And so that it's really fuzzy for parents out there and for young people. We do know that I hear the concept, oh, they're just doing it for attention. But what we do know is that most young people do not spend a long time planning to kill themselves. Many of her clients, she loses, unfortunately, a couple of veterans a year to suicide. Many of them will plan on the anniversary. They'll save up enough money to buy a gun or whatever. But what we see with young people, it's impulsivity, it's immediate response, failed grades, a breakup, romantic relationship, something that's a crisis in their life that they don't have the ability to deal with. And they respond to it by attempting and then unfortunately taking their life. On my team, my crisis team, we call it the 24 to 48 hour window. And it's why we really try to educate our fellow educators. When someone threatens, take it seriously and respond immediately and visit with them and get them the help that they need. We do know that suicide never occurs outside of that context of that major stressor. in that young person's life. And so when I'm meeting, you look at those ACEs, what are the things that they're struggling with in their life? Aloneness, if you look at the research by Joyner, we know that aloneness, isolation is the #1 reason young people take their lives. And when I work with school counselors, I work with therapists, I always ask them to, when you're talking with that young person, tell me about your friends. So when I meet with them, I get called in by clergy, by school district communities, and I'm working with this young person. I'll ask, Sally, give me the names of 2 of your best friends. And it's amazing because Sally will say, well, there's Brenda. And then I'll ask, what's Brenda's last name? I don't know. Where does Brenda live? I don't know. I am frightened by the number of young people that I see that are growing up that do not have the close relationships. They're connected on social media and they'll have hundreds of names of individuals, but they're not having that personal connection. Substance related, as we talked about earlier, young adults with undetected, undiagnosed, untreated emerging disorders, highly likely to experiment with substances. They find in those drugs a temporary relief from that symptom of depression, anxiety, psychosis. When I was a high school principal and I'd pop a young man for smoking pot, I would always ask, Johnny, why do you smoke marijuana? And invariably they would say, it helps me deal with the day. It's the only way I can make it. So they're turning to that drug to fill that void. And so we would not arrest them. We would not suspend them. If their parents got them immediately into the Utah County Drug and Alcohol Program, and I would get an email, or my counselor would get a weekly email from the therapist that they were making progress. Victims of bullying, about 8 to 12% of young people that take their lives are kids that have been bullied. The more severe the bullying, meaning in front of more people, the higher that rates of depression. We find a straight correlation with suicide. Acculturation issues, the LGBTQ adolescents most vulnerable to suicidal ideation and attempts, they often experience that message of rejection from their primary support system. I had a mother with her 15-year-old daughter. I was standing next to her and she turned to her daughter and said, if you come out, your father and I will disown you. So remember what Maslow, food, clothing, shelter, and safety. As a family member, I can go out into society, and if I fail or made fun of or whatever, I know it's safe to always come home. But if that is not safe at home and they're being rejected from family, and then they're the ones that are most often bullied in school, we see LGBTQ and Native American young people as the ones that attempt the most. This is the one that I get called in with my crisis team, or called in to consult with a school, a district, or a community when we have a contagion or a copycat. Adolescents who believe that affirmation and love, or won and earned, are the most vulnerable. There's no capacity to psychologically manage failure. And I see this time and time again when I get called in to work with the school. Tends to be a high performance school academically and a high performance school athletically, performing arts, music, et cetera, et cetera. But those kids have never failed in their life. And we see too many parents that are swooping down and saving them and not allowing them to fail. And I try to remind parents, let your child fail, but be there to help them pick up the pieces so that they can build the resiliency. We adults forget that that's what made us strong. That's what built our armor of resiliency. And if we take that away from that young person, they don't have that capacity to manage that failure. So adolescents don't want to die. They want the pain to go away, but they don't know how to make that pain go away. And because of social media, the movies and other things out there, unfortunately, suicide has been romanticized and glamorized. So what are the protective factors? One of the most important, 1 meal a day as a family with no electronic devices. We talked about caring with a caring adult, association with a religious group. When I'm doing training with teachers, I just did training a couple of days ago with a group of school counselors. And I always ask them, when you go back and work with your teachers, please ask every teacher to call on every student in their class at least once a day, or at least when they're with them. I have too many kids that feel that they're invisible and no one even knows that they exist. Sense of connection, participation in school, positive self-esteem, coping skills, and then that access to and care for services, which eLuma, you see the amazing services that they're able to provide schools that may need that help. So what do we know about working with suicidal youth in therapy? I throw this in for therapists and school counselors, school psychologists, school social workers that have to work with young people. So what is the role of therapists? And I call all of you as therapists, so don't get sidestepped by that. When I was a high school principal and I was losing all of those kids to suicide, I didn't know how to work with them. And so I decided to go back and get another degree in counseling. And my internship, I actually got to spend at the Orem Community Hospital. And I got to be involved with the emergency room and provide help and support. And it was a great concept working hand to hand with amazing therapists. And so thank you for what you do. And so the most important thing starting out is do no harm. Really, really critical. 71% of psychotherapists report one client has attempted, 28% report having had at least one client die by suicide. You know that's going to happen. So what is going on in the mind of a suicidal young person? And I've had the opportunity to be in the emergency room numbers of times working with these young people. One part of them wants to live and is goal-directed and life-affirming. Another part is self-critical, self-hating, and ultimately self-destructive. This ambivalence is always a factor when it comes to suicide. They're struggling because it's almost the good side and the bad side. The emotion that they're going through, that it's extreme self-hatred. You don't deserve to live. And they're talking to themselves. And then that personalized hopelessness, nothing matters anymore. You should just kill yourself. And then pushing away friends and family. What's wrong with you? Look at all this trouble you're causing the people who love you. So that's that mind discussion. And then what's the beliefs? They believe, well, if I become isolated, just be by yourself, you're better off alone because you know you're causing friction with friends, with your family. They then have thoughts of not belonging. You don't fit in anywhere. And then thoughts of being a burden to others. You're just dragging everyone down. You're such a burden, they would be better off without you. I had the chance to meet with Miss Utah 3 or 4 years ago, and she came and met with us and she said, my platform is mental health and I'd really like you to help me put together my platform. So we worked with her. And then we had to present to a group of about 200 young people at Brigham Young University. And I will never, ever forget what she said. She got up and stood in front of all these kids, beautiful young lady. And she started out by saying, my grandfather took his life by suicide. My uncle took his life by suicide. My brother died by suicide. She said, my family struggles with severe depression, mental illness. She said, every day when I get out of bed, I have to decide, do I live or do I die? And if I want to live, I have to fight for it. It was an amazing, she fit these emotions and these beliefs perfectly. So the warning signs: increased alcohol or drug use, sudden mood change, any talk or indication of suicidal ideation or intent, planning or actual actions taken. Treating the suicidal person. People who are suicidal make up a very diverse group. However, one commonality is that they have trouble regulating and tolerating emotions. My wife talks about it a lot in therapy when she works with their veterans. It's the aim of the therapist, the school counselor, psychologist, social worker, to help clients feel connected and valued. And that's what the Hope Squad does. It's that one slice, while assisting them in developing those fundamental skills to regulate and tolerate emotions. Important for therapists to form an alliance in which the client is viewed as an expert on their own condition. Too many times we try to come in and fix it and listen to me, I'm going to fix you. Where we need to form that alliance with that school student, that therapist, or that client that you're working with. Provide structure for that student, as those who are suicidal usually feel very fragmented. And then important to include anyone in the client's life who are capable of being a source of support. Remember, I talked about it, identifying those peers and others that you feel you could talk to. because of the therapist's first contact where that school counselor or the school psychologist with the suicidal person could be the only contact they have with them, the initial session could be their only chance at intervention and treatment and saving a life. And that's why eLuma and all of these other programs are so valuable. We are, here it is, Mental Health Month, 988, right? Suicidal Crisis Lifeline, 24/7 call, text, chat. For us in the state of Utah, we use Safe UT that we work with. Questions? This is our website, hopesquad.com. We have a lot of information that's there. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn back to the experts and see what questions you have.
Thank you.
I don't know about experts, but
I know.
questions, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Hudnall. We so appreciate your time today. You just have so much impactful, powerful information that we were so pleased to have you as part of our suicide awareness prevention campaign. And there's a couple things that you touched on in your presentation that I wanted to kind of go back to in case, there's some people who are not familiar with some of the mental health lingo or not, but you mentioned ACEs. And I'm assuming you're talking about the adverse childhood experience. Can you talk a little bit about how that fits into that? Because I think ACEs is not only important to understand, but it's what's often school districts use in their tier 1 screening. They look at that information to kind of see which students may be at risk.
Yeah, one of the things we do know, Paula, is that by age 5, trauma tends to really affect young people later on in elementary, middle school, and high school. And I've seen it more and more in middle school, which has really frightened me and surprised me. We see it with young people that have had trauma. The ACEs gives us a chance in those interviews to just better understand that young person and what has happened in their life so that we can kind of rate the risk factors. So we have young people that have been sexually abused, emotionally abused, physically abused, and in my state, even spiritually abused. And it's a new area that I do some work with. And then we have young people that have experienced trauma, even in divorce. Sometimes we adults look at it and go, oh, they're handling the divorce really well. So you start ticking through that checklist. And the more checks you're making, the higher the risk factor for that young person to have struggles in their life. Because a lot of times we think as parents, oh, they've had it, but they'll suck it up. They'll just get through it. But when those problems keep building, and a lot of young people will bury it, and then there'll be a trigger later on. There'll be something that happens later on in their life that then they have to deal with. And a lot of times they don't have those coping skills, and that's where we see that acting out behavior in some cases.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to say that is really important to know that there is a balance between how hard you push a child and how much you see and detect the differences. Many of the tools and tips and tactics you shared with us today are really important, especially for identifying signs and helping these young people open up. I live in a town called Harriman, Utah, and Harriman High School had 8 suicides in a very short period of time. And one of those young and very difficult. This was several years ago, but Hope Squad is involved in Harriman High School and has had a tremendous impact. And much of it that I think we attribute it to here as locals is peer-to-peer supports.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes adults don't understand what the young people are going through, and that peer-to-peer support is such a wonderful way to bridge the gap between the young mind and an adult or a therapist who has the skills and training to really address it. And it's really unfortunate that we have to experience these to really understand what's going on, but I can say that the Hope Squad has had a direct influence through that peer-to-peer connection in our local high school. So
Yeah, it's been amazing. We're in 1,400 schools now in 40 states, and we've had over 10,000 kids referred for help and over 2,100 hospitalized. The Hope Squad members are taught to be the eyes and ears. My son was actually an assistant principal at Harriman during that time. And
wow.
I spent many weeks up there with the district, working with them and their amazing district mental health specialist, McKinsey. And one of the things that we did, and I was sharing earlier with George and Paula, that I come in and meet with the community, and then I asked the superintendent to set up a luncheon, and we invited every therapist in the community. And she kept saying, "Why are we doing this?" And I said, "Because this is the power that will help us get through this." And about 65 therapists showed up, and she was floored.
Wow.
Because she said, no one will show up. I had my interns from BYU do the research, and we tracked down every therapist in those 7 cities. And I did kind of a similar presentation, but at the end, I turned to the therapist and I said, "Now, what can you do to help us get through this crisis?" And I was almost brought to tears by the volunteerism of, well, we'll come in and help in classrooms. We'll do parent meetings, we'll do all of these things to help the family, because that child is in crisis, but you got to focus on the family to help strengthen them. And professional therapists are so critical. It's why the Hope Squad, when we first started out, we built a partnership with Wasatch Mental Health. And in order to have a Hope Squad now, you have to have a partnership with the local mental health agency. We get calls from around the country and they say, "We want to start a Hope Squad." And then the first question we ask is, "Do you have a partnership?" "Oh, no, we don't." We tell them, you got to get one. And then we can start one, because the valuable resources out there like eLuma and others can really help families get through those crises.
Yeah.
Now going back to Jeremy's point about the peer-to-peer and the connectiveness, that was interesting when you talked about the COVID rates actually dropping, but then kind of increasing in a very specific group, the female group. I forgot the ages, but it was very particular that specific group did see a rise and in the emergency room. And so when I think back to that peer-to-peer, they probably had the greater loss of the in-person connectedness, right? That whole piece.
Yeah.
And so being a practitioner, and I'd like to say I'm the perfect counselor, but sometimes I'm not that right fit for that individual.
Yeah.
And so I was at a school and the demographic was a different, and the grandmother, it was a demographic where the grandparents were primarily raising all the kids. Most of the kids' parents were incarcerated, but the grandparent reached out to me. She goes, "I don't want to offend you or insult you, but my grandson really needs to talk to a male, a man." Like, right. I got it. We have one. Let me hook you up with our this other school psychologist who is a male. He's actually volunteers for the Big Brother, so it's going to be a great match. But can you speak to a little bit on how important that peer-to-peer is, even just in the cultural context, the cultural competency?
We do a lot on the reservations, and I got called out. The federal government asked me to go out and help it's called the Lower Yukon School District, and it's right against the Bering Sea. And I mean, you can almost see Russia, and 8 villages, and they unfortunately had lost quite a few kids to suicide.
Oh, wow.
It was fascinating when I first went in and met with the young people. I saw immediately how they shut down. But over a period of time, because I spent a lot of time out there, I really built this relationship with them, my wife and I both, and they started to trust us. Well, then there was an adult suicide and some others. So they flew out this crisis team to help. And it was fascinating for me to watch these outsiders would come in, and I was an outsider too, but I had been there enough times that they accepted me into the village. These individuals would come in and the kids immediately would just stop talking and just look down. And then they would do their presentation. And then when they would leave, kids would talk with each other immediately. So there is that. I was on an airplane in Washington, and all of a sudden these 7-foot giants got on, and the individual, I got bumped up to first class because I travel so much, which, can I tell you, it's pretty nice. I mean, there's, when you're way in the back, and then they come up and say, oh, by the way, we have a seat, and they move you up. And this gentleman sits next to me, reaches over, introduces himself. He's the coach of the basketball team, University of Washington. So he said, what do you do? And I told him, and he goes, oh, we got to talk. And I said, why? And well, a couple of years before that, their star athlete of the football team took his life by suicide. And it was in all the magazines, Sports Illustrated and everything. But he said it was so fascinating because they brought in the crisis teams, and their offices are up above the gym where they were meeting. Crisis team would leave, and you would see the kids start moving around to the groups that they were comfortable with, right? That peer-to-peer. And that's why it's so valuable to really empower them and then provide the help, not to be therapists, not to be counselors, but to be that support. A psychiatrist from the University of Utah, my mentor, Dr. Doug Gray, he says you can have 100 kids referred to the school counselor for suicidal ideation. 97 of them would never need to talk to a professional if they just had a friend to talk to. That's the value of it.
I mean, I'm going to get real personal here for a minute. And I've had serious suicidal ideation. And there was a point in my life where it got to the point where I was thinking, how do I take my life? And I think that no one's immune. You know, you look at the example of Kate Spade too, which is one of the most prominent women in design and fashion. No one's immune from this. And like you've talked about, isolation, feeling of belonging and connectedness is something all of us struggle with. As a matter of fact, last week we had Dr. Samet from New York, very great webinar. And he shared statistics from back in 2006, there was a turning point where homicide and suicide, they passed each other. Homicide and suicide being causes of death for young people, and suicide passed homicide as a leading cause of death.
Right.
And he reported that many of the same things that we're talking about today, which is isolation, feelings of belonging. And the significance of that time period was the advent and mass adoption of social media.
Yeah.
And the inherent isolation that it causes. In many ways, it's a good thing too, but in other ways, it's actually promoting isolation and lack of belonging. And, you know, when I think about what you're doing with the peer-to-peer and and this Hope Squad, what I'm curious to understand is, how do you deal with these peers who have feelings of guilt, thinking, am I doing enough? How do you train them adequately, help them understand that they aren't going to be able to control the choices of the peers that they're mentoring either? Because I can imagine that's a really hard job for a peer who's got a weight on their shoulders.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. When we were starting in my own district, I was lucky enough to be in a position of authority that when my principals pushed back and I said, yeah, we're doing this, a couple of comments. The first one is that we actually had the Utah Attorney General on our team and our county attorneys and others. And someone asked about liability, and he made a great comment. He said, you know, I've never known a school district to be sued because they were trying to help someone, but I know three districts right now that are under lawsuits because they've done nothing. Mm-hmm. And then the second part of it is we do a pre and post survey with every young person. We train our curriculum. The students are trained self-care, they're trained boundaries, and they really create a family among themselves on that Hope Squad of 25, 30, 40 kids. So they meet once a week minimal for 30 minutes. The first week is a lesson. The second week is an activity that reinforces what they've just learned. How do I talk to a friend? What are the warning signs? QPR, how to question, how to persuade, how to refer. Self-care, boundaries, taking my phone and putting it in a charger every night so I'm not staying up all night trying to be a therapist to friends. But about 7 years ago, AFSP, Dr. Phil Rogers, who was their lead researcher, came and spent some time with us and became another mentor. And he helped us develop in our survey. We do a pre and post survey with every Hope Squad member. We have one of the highest data collections of young people because we have almost 50,000 Hope Squad members around the world.
Wow.
And we ask the question, is this too much pressure on you? And it's been amazing because our researchers from the universities actually have presented in Australia. 85% of the kids, Hope Squad members say, no, it's a good pressure, because real pressure is when your friend comes to you and tells you they want to kill themselves and you don't know what to do, or another friend gives a warning sign and you don't understand it and they go and take their lives. That's pressure. And that's it's a you know, and
So you're equipping them with the tools. So it's actually the opposite of my psychology, which is you're giving them the tools to face the pressure.
That's right. That's right. Dr. Scott Poland, who's one of the premier postvention down in Florida. I have followed him for 30 years and he's phenomenal. He and I were talking about it last week, and that was the same thing. He said, we have to stop being afraid of educating people. Channel or ABC Nightly News 2020 did a special about 6 months ago on the results of COVID around the United States. And they interviewed these families that lost family members and all the doctors and everybody. And then they came to the United States Surgeon General and he talked. And at the very end, he said, we've got to do a better job of educating families, and we've got to do a better job of equipping young people on peer-to-peer. And then it rolled the last 6 minutes of the program. It rolled into Mason High School in Ohio that does a Hope Squad. And it interviewed these young people and what they did during COVID to help their peers. So it's not a perfect model and it's not the only one, but it's one more tool in the toolbox to identify those peers so that we can get them help.
Yeah, and now that you're describing how the mentors are trained, it seems like it's a dual-fold purpose, because you're teaching the Hope Squad ambassadors, I guess, those student mentors, those very important resiliency skills themselves, because as they move on into the greater life stressors, they have this toolbox, as well as providing support to the peers in the classroom. So I'm thinking teachers and parents and administrators, this is a great option for them.
Yeah, it's a BYU went back. We've been doing, so I think that the most coolest thing for me is we started at Timpview 17 years ago, and the principal contacted me in May, Fidel Montero, and he said, I just want to remind you, this is our 17th year without a suicide. You know, that alone is amazing.
Wow.
The other part of it is we're now being overwhelmed with requests because we're now doing a pilot Hope Squad in the VA, in 2 VAs, one in Ohio, one in Utah. We just started a Hope Squad at an Air Force base in Florida because they had lost a couple of pilots to suicide. We're doing 2 corporate Hope Squads. We have 2 police chiefs that are developing Hope Squad. We had a doctor and 2 emergency room nurses come and get trained. And I said, why are you coming? And they said, we want to start a Hope Squad in the emergency room because it talk about pressure, right? And I think the last one that just excites me the most is we have about 50 master trainers around the country. And this master trainer had put her mother in not a kind of like a care center, not a nursing home, but the next step. And she came back to visit her the next week, and there had been a death and a suicide. And if you look at the rates, age 70 and higher have the highest rates of suicide of any age. And so she's sitting there with her mother. Her mother said, what's that program that you're involved with? And she said, oh, it's Hope Squad. And she said, well, can't we do a Hope Squad here? So we started the first ever Hope Squad in a care center in Pennsylvania, and we have this amazing picture of these 4 70 to 80-year-olds in their Hope Squad shirts, getting ready to go out and support the rest of the care center. It's unlimited because we all need to be connected, and it's peer to peer.
Well, I think that's what my big takeaway is from this today, Dr. Hudnall, is that all of us need to practice these good habits. And there are signs that can help us intervene with young people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts or ideation. And Hope Squad is a tremendous program. I hope that all of us develop healthy habits, make sure we're not isolating ourselves, that we're connecting, that we're programming our bodies, brains, and our environments to be healthy for us. We're going to close up today. I can't believe the time is already gone. We will be sharing this recording with everyone who has registered and additional materials. I want to remind you of the webinar next week, which is Back to School Medicaid Mingle. Come and learn from 2 experts, Dr. Millward and Steve Ireland, on the topic of Medicaid.
Hey, Jeremy, minor correction here. The webinar is actually tomorrow.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant tomorrow. I'm getting all mixed up. Thank you, George. I'm glad you jumped in because it is tomorrow. So hurry and go register. Come join us tomorrow. We also want to remind you to schedule a consultation with someone on our team. You can either go to that link or use your camera, scan this QR code, and we will happily, very gladly donate $50 to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We want to move this forward, even if it's a good conversation and it leads to better outcomes for people, students, teachers, and admins alike. Thank you once again for being part of this. Dr. Hudnall, thank you. Paula Morrison, thank you. We want you to be part of this conversation, everyone. So come and join. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.